Chapter 67.
Ow, oh ow, ow.
Zambi kept muttering to herself despite being seemingly unharmed. Bones had shattered entirely, of course, but that happened. They'd get him out of here in one piece, they'd get old man Leo out of here, and they'd be okay. That was what was going to happen. No matter what. To her far left, and Zambi counted her blessings that she had decent to amazing night vision, Leopold had fallen at such an angle the wind had been knocked out of him. He was bleeding a bit from his back and side, but still breathing shallowly. She wasn't a doctor or anything, but... well, she had ended up seeing a lot of wounded humans. He'd be fine. They'd all be fine. Nervously, her eyes cast around for Zhao. He was nowhere to be seen, despite having fallen with Bones and Leopold. That, he was.
Help!
Far above came the familiar sound of his voice. Zhao's shirt was pinned against a pillar of some kind of pale, glass-like stone. It might not have been stone, but either the pressure of Lazarus' indefatigable, hatred-born strength or his violent toxins had turned it into. Whatever that was. A danger.
Hang on. I promise I'll be, right there. I'll just climb the pillars or something, and...
But that wasn't happening. The fallen pillars of earth were easily as smooth as glass themselves, and no matter how agile she was, the leaves she had were ornamental, not clinging vines. And it wasn't as if it was just Zhao's shirt that was pinned to the pillar.
Zams. Zambi, don't, I think if you keep going, I'll just kind of drop, eventually. And be right along after you guys.
He was trying to smile, but it looked like he couldn't really remember how to. It kept on drifting back hazily onto Zhao's face, which was when she realized. It wasn't as if he realized how much pain he should be in.
Don't be, there's no way I can carry Leo. He'll smell like old books and whatever I blew into his face. I can get Bones, but I'm not moving on my own until you join me.
He could hear the worry in her voice, that much she could tell. Zhao's grimace faded back into an uneasy smile that reminded her of one of the magazines Lorelei had brought them. Grendolf might have found it, possibly. It had been full of smiling pictures of people wearing clothing. A friend of hers found magazines like that pretty interesting, but... haha, why was that even coming to mind?
You didn't even know what your full power mix was, Zams. Geez, that's just like you.
Zambi had been trying to find some good handhold, some hidden grip that she might have missed while she was talking, shimmying up the pillar only to fall backwards onto her back. It happened again and again, and despite her good fortune.
Yeah, well. Maybe I do know, and I'll tell you if you get down from there.
It sounded stupid, but she couldn't think of anything to say. Her stalks felt winded and shaky, and she knew. She somehow knew, wait.
Zhao. Okay. Bro. I'm begging you, this is going to be the most important thing. Don't laugh. Just do what I say. Please.
His eyes got a bit of focus back, and stared down at her from the impossibly high pinion he was affixed to.
Can you, like, take off your shirt, somehow?
It was telling that his reaction, even with so much blood, and even as unaware as he was a gesture that perhaps all humans everywhere would understand, even if all plants everywhere might not, the disbelieving, slightly raised eyebrow born of confusion. It was just as telling that it hadn't even passed him by before he flailed his right hand up at his shirt, ineffectually. Which? Zambi winced. The moment Zhao had managed to move, too strong a word, wiggle would be better, the center of gravity left the pillars in his flesh. He free fell from one stone to the next, wincing like a battered rag doll and bending all the while. Zambi raised to try to stand under him, but he fell too quickly and landed at her side. There was no crunch as Zhao hit the ground. It seemed he was far too broken for that.
I can kind of feel this.
Zhao murmured, rising unsteadily to his feet. He really shouldn't have been able to, but Zambi raced forward, ripping what was left of the cloth and setting to work with an admirable efficiency. She had no clue what all was supposed to stay where it was in terms of vitality, and when she was done Zhao was half covered with bandages, soaked brownish red.
Can you walk, do you think?
Zambi murmured as she applied the finishing touches, nicking a bit of Bones' tarry stuff and some of her own fiber. Not enough to be rude, mind, but...
Yeah. I feel kind of... gelatinous, I guess. But not too hurt or anything. You should feel really hurt.
No matter how much she gestured, she knew it wasn't going to show just how hurt she meant, but, well, he was laughing, so that was something at least. And she wasn't down here alone, and even if they couldn't find an exit, Bones'd be up soon and then the three of them would be together, and she could bear anything as long as she wasn't alone.
Tell you what, I promise I'll cast an incredible urn with the 3-part tragedy of how hurt I don't feel when we get back. Then we'll fill it with some of Paul's mysterious soda-flavored cucumber beverages and drink until we're sick.
His grin was half hidden by bandages, too, but a smile was a smile, and she smiled back.
Now we're talking. So, what's the plan on the whole getting back part?
It was a question she imagined neither of them were going to have an easy time answering. Far, far above she could see what looked to be steel, maybe? Stuff that reminded her a little of Ruslana's cool base place, all concrete and stuff. Below those was more dirt, more rock. These didn't feel like caverns, though. More like a crypt. Or a nest. Somehow, it ended up falling on her to carry Leopold because Zhao looked pitiable even if he didn't feel it. They agreed to use Leo's jacket as a sling for what was left of Bones, Zhao promising that he'd apologize to the old man when they got out of this place, which they would.
Maybe Lorelei'll come pick us up. That'd be the easy way to do things, but just in case she doesn't, I guess we pick a direction and start walking. I'm thinking.
Zhao went quiet, and limped off. She followed, slowing her pace, even carrying Leopold, to match his. They took frequent stops to rest, Zhao looking confused every time they did, because he could feel unable to go any further, but not feel the reasons why. It went like this in silence, until they had walked for what seemed likely to be a day, if there were days deep in the underground like this. She had strong roots, but not deep ones, and this place had no plants at all. The ground was not rock, she had realized, but salt, crystalline salt flats that did not shine but felt warm enough to scald even when the air was deathly cold.
Bones'll be up soon,
she offered, but realized that invalidated what she had said. If a day had passed, Bones should have fixed himself right back up, right? Right. And yet she felt certain that a day, or perhaps longer, had drawn to a close. And yet there were no walls in any direction, and the pillars of rock were identical to one another, and she could not even see the one that had so torn into Zhao. And yet it felt like the darkness were closing in on them, even given the occasional bleary dark glow from above, which seemed to be neither Lazarus nor anything else.
Can we stop for a bit?
He said, and it wasn't a question. Zhao somewhat fell forward, and Zambi reflexively eased Leo up against a stone, his own wounds having clotted over, and his breathing having normalized, at least. She caught Zhao before Bones' skeletal bits could scatter into the gritted salt and become lost, and helped slowly lower him down into it, then sat beside him.
Rough place we've ended up in, hey?
Zhao mused, laughing.
It does seem pretty bad, but we've been through worse. We'll just keep walking, and eventually find a wall. That'll be something to navigate by.
Zambi noticed that his face had fallen in a bit. It wasn't sunken or sallow. Not yet. But he had looked, well, healthier, in the past. And even beyond that, Zhao looked content. Too content.
Yeah. I feel that way too. Compared to the yards, this place is nice. Comfy, even. And if I've done well enough for the rest of you. Not yet, you haven't. You can rest a bit, but that's it. Don't worry, I'm just going to rest for a bit. Nothing more.
Silence ate away at her psyche, but Zambi bore it stoically. Zhao perhaps realized her discomfort, for even though he had said he was going to rest.
What do you think it would be like to live a quiet, boring life?
It was such a silly question, she couldn't help but laugh a little. He smiled at the reaction, his eyes closing.
There really isn't such a thing. I mean, we tried pretty hard, not that it could have been boring with our terrible threesome leading the charge, but, you know. I guess I don't give much thought to what-ifs, unless... Well, there's a point. I guess I felt like, maybe at first I kind of hoped that things would be stable here. Then they weren't, and we made the best of them. Again and again. And now, we got so close to something. To me leaving? And I'm not even sure how I felt about that, about staying, or leaving, or just...
Zhao struggled, his throat tensing up as the words stuck in his throat.
Life here has been anything but quiet, or boring. And I've loved it, and I don't want to, we'll get out, is what I'm saying. So.
Zambi said nothing, and fiddled with the baubles hanging analogous to her hair. Like her hair, they weren't really jewelry, of course.
You're going to have to eat something, eventually. I'm probably... Nobody's eating anyone. I'd eat Leopold before it came to that.
Zambi laughed and made a face, but Zhao still looked.
And, if it came down to that, just... keep talking to me like this, alright, and I don't mind just waiting here. The darkness is kind of comforting, like this. It's not scary, like I thought things would be.
She nodded, and took his hand.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how comforting it is, hey? Don't worry. I'll be here. But, it's time to move again. Right.
It took him a while to remember how to squeeze it, but...
Yeah. Suppose it is.
She wasn't sure how long again they had marched in silence, maybe it hadn't even been a day, but a matter of moments that felt like eternities because of the scorching, parching salt beneath them, or perhaps it really was an eternity, and the time in this place was a parody of the thing. But march they did, until first they saw it. An empty place, that might once have qualified as a city, long, long ago. The shell of it was constructed from great bricks of tan brown rock or mud, perhaps tunneled through by a great serpent, of the kind whose progeny still roamed the land. No skeletons, save the one Zhao carried astride his back, remained in the broken realm. But fragments of salt beneath their feet, and fabric, too, hinted that once there might have been people in such a place. It took them 2 of the days that Zambi was not sure were days to reach the entrance to the city, where its great pillars rose past the pillars they had tumbled from, and another 3 beyond that to reach the central plaza, once grand and carved from the same rock. Not awash, as it was now, with the gritty broken fragments of salt. The residences seemed to have been carved for giants, perhaps, or non-humanoids. Perhaps they were not residences, but temples, or storages. Zambi rushed from building to building looking for food, perhaps selfishly imagining water, at least. But dry roots were no good for finding fresh water, and after the 5th empty building, whose entranceway was so overburdened by salt that when she finally managed to pry it open, torrents of the stuff had shot out, knocking her backwards and onto the warm, gritty ground. She limped back to where her three companions were sitting silently. It was a fountain they were sitting on. Zambi laughed, long, quietly. A dry, empty fountain, filled to the brim with salt that only just obscured the decorative patterns inside of it.
Ciao.
She mumbled, the first words for however many days it had been, now.
Gonna rest for a while. Wake me up, later? We'll.
Zhao was silent for a long time. He hadn't been able to rest, or to follow her. It felt as if he had existed parallel to any other place, like something, or someone, or perhaps most frighteningly of all, a great nothing was looming over them, drawing little lines on blot paper that then they'd rip up, and... But Zambi had fallen beside him, and she was very dry. Her skin, too, felt like blot paper. And he only dared touch it for a moment, for fear she might flake away into the salt below them. Was it salt? Darkness loomed at the edge of his vision, begging to be let in and overcome the ruined landscape around them. It promised to be welcoming and kind, to overcome the last few worries he had, and treat them all equally, save Bones, perhaps, who would eventually wake into this. And see. Zhao stared into the emptiness from where he sat, hands against his legs. Slowly, they creaked from the salt that had fallen over him, perhaps from some deposit so high upon the roof that they could not see it. He took great care moving his three companions to one of the few roofs not coated with salt. He could not move quickly, but they were lighter than they had been. Then, he shook until the salt fell from his shoulders and bandages where it had not seeped into them, and walked past the salted fountain, ignoring the pass of time and the fogginess in his mind. Darkness slowly seemed to retreat around him, peeling away with the cityscape until he reached a huge building that was not carved out of rock nor salt, but something else entirely. Perhaps it was not a building but a single wall, the last remnant of something that had been, once, long ago. Inside it, the fallen dragon, Lazarus, lay on a bed of white powder, cinders, perhaps, or ash.
Die!
Lazarus commanded, and to Chao's surprise the command held no hate to it. If anything, it was choked with something other than the toxins dripping in between Lazarus' teeth. Certainty. Against any other matter, the cloud of horrific smog belched by Lazarus would have instantly torn bone from flesh, filled the lungs and intruded upon the brain in such a way as to cause life to flee quickly and yet excruciatingly, each minute strung out into hours of mental evisceration. But Zhao felt nothing as the fog swirled around him, hissing and cajoling and making skin pop where it came into contact with his flesh. He shut his unbandaged eye against it, and felt the skin hiss, but no pain came with it, and he could still hear Lazarus breathing, slowly.
Die!
Lazarus again whispered, and Zhao heard the roar of stones as he pressed onwards, the unholy dragon's mighty claws rending the very ground he walked upon. But Zhao had already fallen so far, the idea of the abyss no longer frightened him. He continued to walk forward, knowing that if he fell now, it would not matter. So he would not fall.
Die!
Lazarus pleaded, and Zhao did not. Finally, Zhao could feel the weighty heaving of Lazarus breathing, and sat down on the cinders next to the dragon. They felt so thin that they might collapse and suck him into them alive, choking the life out of him where poison itself could not. Many of the days passed in the underground kingdom, and yet, perhaps it was only moments.
Why will you not die?
Spoke Lazarus, finally.
I have a friend, whom I spend a lot of time with. She really likes being close, and I'd do anything for a friend.
Zhao paused.
She's very poisonous, though it's usually more minor than this.
He risked unwrapping one of the many bandages now almost entirely reddened from blood, and placed his hand against the exposed flesh.
Even though she couldn't come to see you herself, right now, she made it possible for me to.
Slowly, Zhao tried to reapply the bandage, hands swaying clumsily. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps the tears. With his left eye bandaged, it was hard to be certain.
That friend is in trouble. My friends are in trouble. I'm in trouble. And, perhaps, in a place like this, all alone, you need a friend like that, too. So.
Zhao shut his eye. Lazarus had stopped breathing, and was very quiet.
That's why, right here and now, I can't die.
And both were silent and alone, in the dead kingdom under the earth. Chapter end.